Hey there and welcome back to the channel. So last week I saw a bearish article on Palantir suggesting that the government side of the business is at risk because the US government is going to develop an in-house solution to replace Palantir's software. Now that got me wondering about just how resilient the government side of Palantir's business model actually is. And as a former employee of the Defense Department in Canada, I feel like I'm in a reasonable position to actually dig into this issue. So in this video, I'm going to break down the three main reasons why Palantir Gotham is going to remain an integral part of the US government's software suite for the foreseeable future, and why anybody who says otherwise has no idea what they're talking about. But first, a quick disclaimer. I'm a major Palantir bull and I currently have 976 shares at an average cost basis of $21 per share. Now with that out of the way, let's get into it. As crazy as it might sound, it actually seems as if it's illegal for the US government to develop in-house software systems or any other product for that matter if there's actually a viable commercial product on the open market. Now I should thank one of my viewers, Digital Cleavage, who brought this to my attention. Nice name, by the way. But in a nutshell, there's a 1994 law called the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act, which says that government agencies or organizations cannot build something in-house if there's already a viable solution on the open market that can accomplish the same objectives. The whole point of the law is to prevent the government from spending a lot of time and human resources trying to reinvent the wheel. And for good reason, as it turns out, because Palantir is actually the first company to sue a US government agency for breach of that law. The story is actually a little bit amusing and a little bit sad for the US taxpayers anyway. Essentially, the Army was trying to develop a new military intelligence software system to handle all of its sensitive data, and it spent well over a decade and over $3 billion trying to develop this system. But after all of that time and all of that money, the new intelligence system, which was called DCGS-A, was actually a total flop. Apparently it was super glitchy, and even the intelligence analysts didn't want to use it, and they apparently requested Palantir instead. But of course, as is sometimes the case with large bureaucracies, common sense did not prevail, and the military brass kept pushing to have their own in-house system and did not want to actively consider Palantir or any other outside external providers. Anyways, long story short, Palantir sued the US Army over this and actually won. Not only did they win the lawsuit, but they subsequently won the $800 million contract to provide the new intelligence system. So even after Palantir sued the US Army, it's not even like that relationship was poisoned. They actually leveraged the results of that lawsuit to win the almost $1 billion contract, and that is some 3D chess right there. Anyways, even if it was technically illegal for the US government to develop an in-house alternative solution to Palantir Gotham, there's still a few reasons why that would never happen. Anything that the government builds is probably going to cost orders of magnitude more than what the private sector could build it for, and also take significantly longer. The goal of government procurement is always to come in on time and on budget, and that rarely ever happens. The private sector, on the other hand, is built to be lean and efficient and to make the most of limited resources because the alternative is insolvency, whereas on the government side of things, there is not the same sense of urgency and the same level of risk. And because of those differences in the incentive structures in government versus private sector, governments, just generally speaking, cannot do things as quickly or as cost effectively. And do you know how many stories there are out there about government procurement gone wrong? And in these cases, I'm not even necessarily talking about the government actually building something, but just trying to buy something and to manage those projects sometimes goes horribly, horribly wrong. Either through total mismanagement or because things simply slip through the cracks with endless bureaucratic red tape. There's just too many examples to count, but here's a few really good ones. For example, the government spent $6 million to import cashmere goats into Afghanistan, and the plan was to create a new cashmere industry using these goats. So the US military purchased 9 rare Italian goats and flew them to Afghanistan, and of course all of them ended up dying and the project was a total failure. And to throw in a Canadian example of how government procurement can go wrong, so I'm not just picking on the US, here's a great article talking about how the Department of Defense has been trying and failing for over a decade to replace their pistols, which have been around since the end of World War II. I'll stop there, but I think you get the idea. It's pretty much a known fact that government and innovation do not go hand in hand. First of all, the government just isn't able to recruit top engineering talent, and you can find plenty of articles discussing the issue and how the government is getting locked out because all of the top software engineers or cybersecurity experts want to go work for the private sector where they can make big money. Now, I don't want to belabor this point too much because there are a lot of great and really smart people that work for the government, but the structure of the government bureaucracy as a whole, the institution, really stifles innovation. Now, there's definitely some notable examples, for instance, DARPA, which is working on some really cool stuff with AI and autonomous weapon systems, just as an example. But generally speaking, governments are much better off funding innovation rather than trying to actually do it themselves. There are just too many levels of approvals and bureaucracy and red tape, and risk-taking is not encouraged, quite the opposite, in fact. And that's why it's so difficult for an institution like the US Army to develop complex software products in-house, and it at least partially explains why there were probably so many glitches with the rollout of that product. Okay, finally, even if the US government had the capacity in-house to develop an alternative to Palantir Gotham, which I can pretty much guarantee you that they don't, it would simply take way too long. The US government just does not have the roster of AI and ML engineers that would be able to actually create something similar to Palantir in a short enough period of time for it to be relevant and useful. And when we're talking about high-stakes security environments where our adversaries around the world, including Russia and China, are coming at us with everything that they have, time is of the essence. We can't wait decades. These solutions need to be ready now, and that's where Palantir steps in, because Palantir Gotham is a commercially viable solution that does everything that the US military is looking for it to do. So yes, in this regard, Palantir has a massive moat in terms of its government business, and I think that there is slim to no chance that Palantir Gotham is going to be pushed out by some sort of in-house government solution. And when it comes to external competition, there's very few companies that are even qualified to bid on the types of contracts that Palantir is winning. You can probably count the number of companies that have been vetted and have the necessary security classification on one hand. So yeah, next time you see some Motley Fool article or anybody else trying to pass off this type of as actual analysis, now you know.